Imagine being handed the entire world. Every army, every coffer, every life inside the greatest empire on earth. Yours to command. And then imagine that the one thing you truly wanted, all that power could not give you. To be a good man. This is the story of the only emperor who saw the throne for exactly what it was, a weight, and carried it anyway. He was born Marcus Annius Verus, into wealth and privilege in Rome. But even as a boy, he was different. So serious, so honest, that the aging emperor Hadrian watched him and gave him a nickname, Verissimus, the most truthful one. Hadrian was quietly choosing the future of Rome, and his eye fell on the solemn child who wanted nothing to do with ruling it. When the path to the throne finally opened to him, Marcus did not celebrate. By every account, he was troubled. He understood, even young, what most men never learn. That power is not a prize to be won. It is a burden that destroys the man who craves it. No longer talk about the kind of man a good man ought to be, he would one day write to himself. Be one. The throne had come looking for the single man in Rome who would rather have been a philosopher. Long before he ruled an empire, Marcus set himself the hardest task a man can attempt: to rule his own mind. As a young man, he fell in love with philosophy. His teacher, Rusticus, put into his hands the notebooks of a former slave named Epictetus, and it remade him. He could have had every comfort in the world. He chose less, took up the coarse cloak of the Stoics, slept on the bare ground, trained himself against his own softness until his mother begged him just to rest on a bed. But the real discipline was the kind no one could see. The book we now call his Meditations, he never wrote for us. He never meant a single other soul to read a word of it. It is a private notebook, and on its pages, you can watch a man fight himself in the dark, arguing down his own anger, talking himself out of self-pity, ordering his own heart to stay patient with the people who had wronged him. Every morning, he wrote himself the same warning. Today, you will meet the ungrateful, the arrogant, the cruel, and not one of them can make you bitter unless you allow it. That is the part no statue will ever show you. The most powerful man in the world rose before dawn to do the quiet, unglamorous work of becoming good. Not because anyone would see it, but because he would. Ask how much of your own character would survive if no one were ever watching. That was the only audience he ever wrote for. In the year 161, the old emperor died, and Marcus at last held absolute power. And the very first thing he did with it was give half of it away. He went before the Senate and insisted that his adoptive brother, Lucius Verus, be raised to co-emperor, with powers equal to his own. Rome had never seen such a thing. No law demanded it. No rival forced his hand. The most powerful man alive simply decided the burden was too heavy for one set of shoulders and chose to share the throne rather than clutch it. Sit with that. Handed everything, his instinct was not to grip tighter, but to divide. Because to Marcus, the crown was never something to be enjoyed. It was a debt he owed to people who would never thank him for paying it. Power, he believed, is not proof that a man is great. It is only a test of whether he can stay good while holding it. Then, the dying began. Around the year 165, soldiers returning from the Eastern Wars carried home an invisible enemy, a plague that would scourge the empire for 15 years. At its peak, it is said to have killed 2,000 people a day in Rome alone. Millions perished across the empire. It was the great catastrophe of the age. Marcus did not retreat to a country estate to wait it out. He stayed. And when the treasury ran dry, bled white by plague and war, he refused the easy path of crushing his grieving people under new taxes. Instead, he did something almost unthinkable for a ruler. He had the imperial treasures carried out into the forum, and he sold them. Gold plate, fine furnishings, jewels, even his wife's silk and gold-threaded gowns, optioned for 2 months to anyone who would buy, to pay for the relief of a dying empire. He sold off his own splendor rather than tax a people in mourning. Do every act of your life, he reminded himself, as if it were your last. He met the worst disaster in living memory by giving away his own gold. Marcus was, at heart, a scholar. He loved books and quiet and study. So fate handed him the exact opposite. For most of the second half of his reign, Germanic tribes poured across the Danube, the Marcomanni, the Quadi, in the most dangerous invasion Rome had faced in generations. And so, the gentle philosopher, who despised violence, spent year after year in cold, muddy camps at the edge of the world, commanding legions in a war he had never wanted. And here, history turns strange and beautiful, because the most searching inward book ever written, the Meditations, was composed in that war tent. Its pages are still marked with the places he wrote them. Among the Quadi, at Carnuntum, on the front line of a brutal campaign, by lamplight, the emperor wrote to himself about patience and death and how to forgive. Be like the headland, he wrote, on which the waves break without ceasing, and yet it stands firm, and around it the raging waters fall still. The world broke against him for 20 years. He made himself the rock. Then came the wound that tests a man most, betrayal by someone he trusted. In the year 175, a false rumor raced across the empire. Marcus was dead, and his most trusted general in the east, Avidius Cassius, a man he had honored and relied on, let himself be crowned emperor in his place. But Marcus was not dead, and so he found himself marching toward civil war against a man he had loved. Imagine the thoughts you would carry on that road. Marcus carried different ones. He told the men around him that his real hope was not to defeat Cassius, but to forgive him, to pardon him face to face, win him back, and prove that mercy could undo what ambition had done. He called it the one victory worth having. He never got the chance. Cassius was killed by his own officers, who brought the head to the emperor like a gift. Marcus refused to look at it. And then he did the hardest thing of all. He took the dead man's letters, the ones that named every fellow conspirator, every hidden enemy, and he burned them unread. He chose not to know, because knowing would only tempt him to hate. He had written it years before. The best revenge is not to become like the man who wronged you. Anyone can answer cruelty with cruelty. It takes the stronger man to refuse. Plague, war, betrayal, and grief. For Marcus buried most of his own children. Of the many born to him, only a handful outlived their father. Any one of these could break a man. None of them broke him, and the reason is the very heart of what he believed. Marcus never prayed for an easier life. He trained himself, instead, to become equal to a hard one. Every setback, he taught himself, is raw material, something the mind can take up and turn into patience, or courage, or justice. The thing that stands in your way does not end the road. Met rightly, it becomes the road. This is not the easy cheer of a comfortable man. This is a verdict reached in a war camp, in the middle of a plague, after burying his own children. Look within, he wrote. Within is the fountain of good, and it will never stop flowing, if you never stop digging. He could not choose what happened to him. He could only choose what he would become because of it. And that, he insisted to the end, was always enough. Marcus Aurelius mastered nearly everything: his temper, his fear, his grief, an empire. He governed the Roman world for 19 years and never once let the power turn him cruel. But there was one thing he could not conquer: his son. For generations, Rome's finest emperors had chosen their heirs by merit, adopting the best man they could find rather than trusting to blood. Marcus broke that chain. He left the empire to his own son, Commodus, and Commodus became one of the most vain and brutal rulers Rome would ever suffer, unraveling much of what his father had so carefully held together. It is the great tragedy of his life. The man who could govern himself could not hand that strength to the one who came after him. Even the most disciplined soul on earth does not get to command the outcome, only his own part in it. He died in the year 180, in a military camp far from home, an old man, worn out in the service of a people who would mostly forget him. "You have lived," he had written to himself, long before. "Now take what remains and live it properly." He was the most powerful man in the world, and he spent that power, every day, on the only conquest that ever truly mattered: the quiet, unseen, unending mastery of himself. That is the measure of a strong man.